Okay, so I wanted to walk you guys through my process about how I tone Instagram. I don't do the exact same thing every single time I tone a photo, but I do something pretty similar. So I'm gonna go in and choose a photo I shot last week on one of our weekly dawn patrols up Ski Santa Fe. So I'm choosing this image for a couple reasons. I like it, it's recent, but also because it has it can be a little bit tricky because I shot in the dark. It was before the sun rose over the hill, but then the sun was already hitting out here. So it actually has sort of some darkness and some lightness that I'm gonna have to work with. You saw what I did right there as I went to the full frame mode. Sometimes I like to zoom in, but on this photo I'd like to zoom out a little bit because it's a landscape. I want to get as much as possible in there, and the landscape is just as important as the subject. So the first thing I'm going to do is go in and start toning, and I'm going to avoid all my filters and just go into the straight tools that we have. So I'm going to make this pop a little more and see if I can't bring out some of the shadows in here by just going into my brightness first. And the rule of thumb, no pun intended, is that I try to live by is just not to overdo it. Like I said, to just enhance the photo a little bit, and you can always go back. You can see, like, if I'm coming up here, I'm losing some of the detail and the highlights up there. This looks better, but it also sort of looks like I've toned it. It looks like I've gone in there and redone things. So I'm just gonna add, a good dose of brightness, but not go too crazy. All right, well, let's start right there. And then I'm gonna go in and choose my shadows, again, to sort of see what I can pull out of the darker area without making it look overdone. So this one you have to be careful with because it's very easy to get that blown out and sort of make it murky. So I'm gonna go in. He's unfortunately wearing a black jacket, so it's gonna be a little hard to get the detail in there, but I'm gonna go in, pull out the shadows again a little more, try not to overdo it, keep it consistent. Okay, I like that. So I've made this area a little lighter. You can always go back by tapping and holding the photo. So you can see I've added a significant amount of lightness into there, but I've kind of lost maybe a little of the detail and the saturation from there. So I'm gonna go in to my highlights and maybe bring those back down a little bit. So that's gonna bring this back down just a touch, but not as much. And it's gonna give me some of that nice blue in the sky and a little bit of that color of the sunrise back there. So I'm not afraid to sort of go in and bring that back down. Done, check it. So I like that, I have a little more detail there. I'm still, this still feels a little blown out in there. So I might go in and add some structure, which again, structure you want to be also really careful about because you can tell that somebody's added too much structure because it sort of starts to get really contrasty like that. So, but structure does tend to add in some of that sort of contrast and detail that I liked from the original one in the darkness. So verging on too much up there. So again, I'm not losing a ton of detail, I'm not blowing things out, but I am sort of seeing, my subject a little better. I'm seeing the skin track a little better. I like that. You notice how that's sort of staying the same and that it's just this area that's been changing quite a bit. I might also touch in the contrast and see if that helps a little. The contrast will then sort of darken things up, so I want to be careful about, not doing that too much. So I'm add a touch of that. Again, it's sort of, we're getting there. We've got more detail in the shadows. We haven't lost a ton of detail on the highlights. And then, it's easy to get gimmicky with the vignette feature because, it's sort of just like the vignette creates a vignette around your photo, and it's easy to sort of make it feel like, oh, like that's cool, like it creates sort of contrast and a feature or a feel that is easy to get held up on. So I try not to do it too much because it just becomes a way you're like, oh, I'll just save the photo by adding a vignette. But I'm gonna add a little bit of it because I do like the way that it sort of adds a touch of, nice dense color to the sides and the top. So I hit done there. All right, so you can see that there's not a ton of change, but what we've really done is sort of gone in and sort of brightened this up and tried to keep that fairly consistent. So you can see that it's early morning. There's that the sun is rising. But it's not extreme. So, getting some alerts. The last thing I want to do is sharpen. That's sort of a rule that I learned as a photographer. You don't want to sharpen before you're done because the sharpen is sort of like the final touch to your photo. And again, you want to really avoid over sharpening because that's an easy way to, it just looks awful and you can tell that you've over sharpened it. So sometimes I'll add sharpness even if it's not super discernible. I don't know, 14 or 15 up in there. It just adds a little bit of crispness to the photo. And we're done. So again, it's not a huge difference, but I've brought out the shadows in here. Again, haven't sort of lost my vista, and we're ready to go.